How much power do you need to run your car audio system? How many batteries do you need? What kind of batteries do you need? Do you need a high output alternator? Do you need to do the big three? Well, the answer to this question is yes. But let's dig a little deeper. Now, first of all, understand that in order to create wattage in your speakers, to get that power out, you have to put power in. Okay, batteries do not create power, batteries simply store power. Now, also understand that your alternator creates a set amount of power per second, whatever that amount is. And your factory alternator is set up to create enough power to run your car and every accessory it has with a little bit left over for additional accessories and to be able to put power back into the battery that it used to start itself when you crank the vehicle up. There's not a lot left over here. So let's say you've got a 130 amp alternator, which is a fairly small one, but that's actually pretty common on smaller cars. You're probably giving up about 75 to 80% of that alternator's power output to run the car, which means you've only got 30 or 40 amps left over that you can use to actively run a car audio system or any other accessory that you add. Whole lot of lights, big winches, things of that nature. So how do we attack this problem? How do we fix it? What do you need? Well, one way to solve that problem is to have more storage. More storage allows you to over use power that you're not creating, to use more power than you're creating for a time until you've exhausted that storage. And now you have to let that alternator with its small amount of power build that power back up to use it again. Uh, and that is one way of solving the problem. If what you're using that uses a lot of power is a temporary thing, it's not a constant drain. Like turning on some really big lights, are you going to leave those on all the time? Are they going to run for an hour? Are they going to run for 5 minutes? You know, those types of things are important to answer. So the next part of that is, what about upgrading an alternator? Upgrading your alternator to something that produces more amperage will absolutely allow you to run more accessories without improving the storage. But it's still limited. So understand that. If you say install a 250 amp high output alternator on your vehicle, now you've gained 100, maybe 150 amps of power that you can actively use before you start tapping into the battery. That 150 amps on an amplifier is going to get you about 1500 watts. So as long as you're using an amplifier that's smaller than 1500 watts and you've got a high output alternator, you're going to be okay. You might still see your headlights dim though whenever you hit that hard bass note. The other alternative is doing both, adding a high output alternator and a larger battery. Now, if you add another AGM battery or a flooded lead acid battery, like the one that comes in your car, you still have one problem to get past. And that's the fact that you can only put in and take out so much energy at one time. An AGM battery has a higher or has a lower internal resistance than a flooded lead acid battery, but it's still pretty low, or it's still a pretty high amount of resistance, rather. In other words, that internal resistance is how much power you can put into the battery at one time and take out of the battery at one time continuously. Okay. A car starting battery is designed to be able to give you 800, 900, 1,000 cranking amps. That's very important, cranking amps. It's designed to be able to give you 1,000 amps for a short period of time. 3 or 4 seconds, 5 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. That's to allow you to start the vehicle. But it's not designed to be able to continuously output that kind of amperage. Also, that battery is not designed to be able to take in power that quickly. So it can only take in about 0.3 to 0.5 C. C, the number that represents, if you look at the battery's amp hours of storage, okay, so if you have a 100 amp hour battery, that means it can output 1 amp for 100 hours or 100 amps for 1 hour, in theory. That's the C rating of a battery also. So if you can only charge it at 0.5 C, that means at most you can put into the battery constantly is 50 amps. Now, understanding that, you also understand that the most you can take out of that battery constantly is 50 amps because you're only putting 50 amps into it. Now, if you go and buy a 300 amp high output alternator and put it on your vehicle, you're going to be pulling power from the alternator, okay? But once you've overpowered the alternator, you're running a 5,000 watt amplifier, say, for example, that's 200 amps more than what that alternator can output. So it's going to be trying to pull power from that battery. And you're trying to put power back into the battery, but you can only put in 50 amps at a time, and the amplifier is pulling out 200 amps for at least a little bit until the battery starts to get warm and the efficiency goes down and you can't put power back into it. And what happens is with this setup, this seemed like a great thing, right? What happens is you will start out cranking the system up, everything's super loud. Within, 10, 15, 30 seconds, it drops hard and your voltage is dipping, your headlights are dimming, and the bass goes away. The whole system kind of starts to fall apart. And it's because you can't charge that battery fast enough to keep up with how quickly you're depleting it. Also, with the flooded lead acid batteries and the AGM or absorbed glass matte batteries, the resting voltage is usually around 12.75 or 12.5 volts. And the battery won't actually start trying to release energy into your system until your voltage is dropped to that point. So if you're running a 300 amp alternator and a 5,000 watt amplifier, and you're pulling 300 amps from the alternator and 200 amps from the battery, you're only going to start pulling that 200 amps from the battery when the voltage is dropped to the battery's resting voltage. If your voltage is up around 13.5, the battery is not helping at all. And your battery is only going to come into play when your voltage is dropped down to 12.5 or 12.7 or whatever that resting voltage is. And then it's just going to start coming into play. So that means you've got between 12.7 and 12 volts of play in there, keeping your system above 12 volts to actively keep things in good health. That's very little wiggle room in there before things start to go chaotic. Understanding all of these things is important to be able to decide what kind of power system you're going to be using for your car audio. Now, let's take a look at a couple of things. First, I want to show you a small battery from Excess Power. This is something that's budget friendly that a lot of people would adopt into their system if they don't have a lot of money. They will go this route to help reinforce their audio system. Well, it looks pretty cool, right? It's an Excess Power battery. We've heard of that brand. It's a good brand. It's $119. It says XP750. We don't know what that means, but that's what it says. Reserve battery. Perfect. Let's have one of those. Okay, let's go down here to the specs. I'm going to show you something. So this battery has 22 amp hours of storage. Now, considering that 0.5 C rating, because this is an absorbed glass matte battery, considering the 0.5 C rating, that means that most we can pull out of this is constantly is 10 amps. That's good for about a 100-watt amplifier. The most we can put into it at one time constantly is 10 amps. Again, this battery would support a 100-watt amplifier. All right, now let's talk about amplifier efficiency, and then I'm going to take you to some other ideas and show you what can be done. The power that an amplifier consumes is, whenever I say 10, I'm multiplying by 10 because, I'm going to try to get this straight. I want you to understand why I'm doing that. Part of the power that your amplifier takes in turns to heat. The other part of it comes out as alternating current that goes to your subwoofers, right? Or your speakers in general. But that part that's pulled out as heat is usually about 20 to 30% of the power. So instead of factoring 12 volts, which is what this battery would be, times the amperage to get the wattage, I change it to 10 volts. That takes away that 20 to 30% and makes it a more easy to work with number. So that's why I'm using 10 volts instead of 12. Now, covered that. Here's the other part of that equation. Most of the time, if you're trying to figure out how much power you need to actively run a system, minimum power, you're going to want to look at about half of what that amplifier is supposed to be able to produce RMS on a constant basis. So, for example, if we have a 100-watt amplifier, it's rated at 100 watts RMS, then we would figure we need to be able to power about half of that, about 50 watts. Okay, that would be about 5 amps of power. Because that amp's not going to be playing a constant sine wave from here to here, it's going to go up and down and up and down. And since it's never going to be hitting its peak, and it's also going to be going, coming in and going out, coming in and going out, the average power that it's going to work with is going to be about half of whatever its maximum is. It's just an easy way to kind of keep track of things. Keeping it real. If you're running less than 1,000 watts of power in your car, as long as your wires and your connections are all good and your battery is not old and your alternator is functioning good and your belt's not slipping and all that stuff, if you're running a 1,000-watt amplifier, your factory system is going to be fine to handle that or less without problems. Anything over that, and my recommendation is to upgrade storage, but not this way. So before I leave, though, you guys are probably going to be asking me about, what about XS Power's Titan 8? Well, I want to show you what's inside of a Titan 8. This right here on the screen is a opened up Titan 8. And you can see they have molded aluminum bars in here. These are for the balancer to connect to. But these are the aluminum, little aluminum bars to connect the cells together. And I'm just not crazy about it. But I want to show you another option. This is the Trunked Under Lithium Banger 10K. Now, there's also a 5K, which is about half the price. So if you're not looking at this much power, there's another option. But I want you to look at what's inside this battery. So at Trunked Under Lithium, we're using these big, heavy copper bars, all bolted to the cells individually. Big, heavy terminal plates with 6 different terminal spots for both sides. Big solid thing with a thick, ridiculously thick, shockproof case that can take much, much abuse without being damaged. This is what you get here. On the other hand, going back to this Titan 8, you're looking at these aluminum bars spot welded to the cells. The case is maybe an eighth of an inch thick here. Any sharp object coming at this from the side would pretty easily penetrate this case. This is typical of what you would find in most mass-produced, factory-produced um, lithium banks. And unfortunately, not only that, but you're going to pay more for this per amount of power that you're getting than you will for this, which is infinitely more well made. Um, so, yeah, that's kind of a thing. But the life doesn't start and end with this. Okay. I just wanted to give you some examples. Most of your AGM batteries are going to be like 100 amp hours, around 100 amp hours, and they're going to have about a 0.5 C, so 50 amp hours in, or 50 amps in, 50 amps out. So to support, a 5,000 watt amplifier, you're going to need probably at least 5 of them, and that's 5 good ones. And the prices on those range from $300 to $500 a piece. Whereas you could pick up the Trunk Thunder Lithium 10K V2, and it would support 10,000 watts, actually around 15,000 watts, with a high output alternator for $1,000. I know it seems like a lot, but once you start buying AGM batteries and realize just how many of them you're going to have to buy to be able to get the capacity of this, it's a whole different game, man. So ultimately, you're losing money if you're buying AGM. If you buy 2 or 3, you've done spent well more than that amount of money, or close to it, depending on which ones you're buying. And you haven't seen any gain from that yet. You've got to get enough of those things to where you have enough throughput with all of them combined. So, say 50 amps per battery, right? That's 10 batteries is 500 amps. That's good for maybe a 10,000 watt or 10,000 watt amp based on our math. So for a 10,000 watts of amplifier, you're going to need 10 AGM batteries, the full size ones, to be able to maintain voltage using that. And you still got the problem of your resting voltage sitting down at 12.75. So it's like you just can't win with that. Again, they're not even going to start trying to help until your voltage just dropped to the point to where you really don't want it to be at anyway. All right. It's like it's like the guy's waiting to help you not fall off the cliff whenever you're already leaning over the abyss before he even starts to try to help. That's kind of how it is. I know it sucks, man. It's just what it is. Now, there's a lot of providers out there for lithium products, which is ultimately where you go. This Trunk Thunder Lithium 10K can handle 800 amps in and out. This thing can replace 10 AGM batteries easily with change, and weighs like 25 pounds. It's a no-brainer, man. And just so you know, I do work directly with Trunk Thunder Lithium. So I do have a discount code, CAE10. If you want to buy something from there, use that discount code. You save 10% off your purchase price. Having said that, lithium is where you want to go. But you also want to be careful who you're buying the lithium from, because not all people are putting these things together are doing it as good as each other. There's no real measuring stick out there. There are some really good hand builders, and Alternator Lithium is a hand builder. And hand builders are usually going to give you a better product than the mass produced guys because they're going to have their hands and their eyeballs on each individual battery bank. And they're going to be using components, putting them together one at a time. And they're going to notice anything going wrong. When the big factory ones, when they're making, thousands and thousands of these things, they've also got the parts milled down to the bare minimum to do the job. Um, it's just not as reliable of a system. The batteries are not going to be as rugged. They're not going to be as safe. They're not going to be as tough. Um, and you're also dealing with the machine whenever you call them for customer service. If you get a hold to Alternator Lithium, you're going to talk to the owner of the company right off the bat. You're going to talk to the guy that built your battery. That's a big deal to me. And you can chat with him. He'll talk to you. This is the kind of people I like to work with. I like to work with a company that I can actually sit and talk to. And they know what's going on because their fingers touched my product. See what I'm saying? There's a lot to be said for the small guy doing the thing. You're going to get a better sandwich when you go to the mom and pop sandwich shop. It's definitely going to be a step up from McDonald's, right? Same concept. So, what about the big three? Let's talk about that. The big three is essentially upgrading your power wire going from your alternator to your battery, upgrading your battery's ground going from the alternator bracket or the engine block to the battery, and then upgrading the ground. Let me think about it. The power going from, no, it's not that one, it's the other one. Is the ground going from the battery to the body or the frame. Essentially, you don't have to think of it as a numbered sequence. Think of it as replacing all the small power wires that are connecting your alternator and your battery to something with bigger wires. Okay. You're wanting to you're trying to flow more energy than that system that's the way it's set up was designed to flow. So you need to be able to and your alternator has to get a ground and a power wire. And what you want is to add, not replace, but add like an alt gauge cable that goes from your alternator's power output on the top there or on the side, wherever it is, over to the battery so that you have an easy path for lots of current to move over to your front battery. Then you want to do the same thing with the ground. You can pick up the ground off of the frame of the alternator or off of the bracket that the alternator connects to the engine with. Somewhere as close as you can, you want to get a hold to one of those big old bolts there and ground it from there to the battery. So now there's a really good path for energy to move from the battery to the alternator, right? Then you run your power and grounds back to your amplifier or to a Alternator Lithium battery back there. Then you run from there to the amplifier. If you set up with that system, even using one of these Alternator Lithium batteries, you can even keep your factory alternator and still pull 5,000 watts, 5,000 watt amplifier on the 5K and 10,000 watt amplifier off the 10K with your factory charging system. It's just got that much power stored and it's that efficient. And your headlights will stop dimming and your base will hold long and strong every time you want to get your freak shit on. That's it, baby. There's somebody out there going to get my reference, but not everybody. If you did, leave it in the comments. So yeah, get lithium. Okay. You need that because it's able to move power quickly in and out. Lots of it. You're welcome to pick up lithium anywhere you want, but be sure that you're buying it from someone you can trust, someone who builds a good product, stands behind their product, and make sure you're not overpaying for what you get. If you don't want to do the research and figure all that crap out, hit up Trunk Thunder Lithium, use discount code CAE10, and all of that's already taken care of for you. You're going to get a great product. It's well designed, well built, and backed by a solid warranty and a solid customer service that you can depend on. Is there anything I missed? I know there's things that I missed. If you guys have any more questions about this, and I know you're going to, leave them down in the comments below. I will answer them to the best of my ability. And as always, slam that subscribe button, smack that like button, treat your neighbor right, be nice to the people around you, and show love to your community. Peace, guys.